Maida. I'm from Cape Verde, and I'm based at King's College.
I'm Tibello. I'm a researcher and writer from Maseru, Lesotho.
My name is Rua Zano. I'm a lawyer and I'm from Zimbabwe.
Hi, my name is Taimi Tembu, and I'm from Namibia, and I work with the Office of the Judiciary.
Kabanda Omal from Uganda, PhD scholar and the founder of Kalube Consults Limited.
So we are here today to discuss about governance. I think youth is, we cannot not talk about youth, but we'll talk about governance issues in general. We'll talk about aid, gender, and women equalities. So first of all, what do you think are the main issues related to violence and governance today? And you can use specific examples from your own country.
I'll be more specific in relation to the role of the police in national states. Most of the times, violence is a reflection of poor governance, and governance in this sense we are looking at maintaining law and order. Communities have a big role to play in ensuring safer and secure communities and societies. And the role of community policing as a policy or as a practice needs to be implemented to ensure that the citizens participate in contributing towards the efforts of the police within the grassroots. So most of the cases, like in Uganda, there is a high rate of increase in crime, and this has been due to the lack of trust between the citizens and the police, the blockage of information from the families to the police, and then the corruption that is infecting the whole process of trying to engage the crime preventers within the practice of community policing. So looking at aspects of governance and violence, we have to acknowledge that peace without war does not mean that there is no violence. Violence can still exist in societies that are existing without the societies themselves engaging the citizens. So in this process, we are looking at possibilities of how the citizens could be activated to be very active in the processes of ensuring law and order. And by activating community policing as a policy and practice, it's assumed that proper means of engaging informally and formally would permit an easier exchange of information to allow information flow to the authorities for proper management and engagement of those who can be able to permit the institutions to detect possibility of crime, reduce the evolution of crime, at the same time contribute to the control efforts and mechanisms for their efficiency, to guarantee proper governance of crime situations and also permit proper engagement of the citizens at the grassroots levels.
Thank you so much, Kabanda. But that is also a human rights issue, the use of violence by those who are not entitled to.
Just to add on to what he has said, when we look at governance and violence, we tend to look at it from the national, or rather from the structural perspective. But this goes back to where we are coming from, because everything starts in the home. When we look at gender-based violence, for example, it also falls under this bracket of governance and development in Africa. So when we're trying to tackle the negatives that come with it, the problems that it brings to society, we should not forget that. So when we have the situation that we have right now, we see that we have a lot of gender-based violence going on, not just in private spaces, but also in public spaces, and this has been condoned. So for us to expect really to see change when we are condoning this from the lower level of society, it's rather meaningless. So
how has this been addressed in Zimbabwe?
Well, looking at Zimbabwe, we have an active civil society working on these areas, and over the past few years, we have seen change. I was talking of an example with the He for She campaign, because there's always been that issue of saying, let's involve men when we talk of, for example, gender-based violence in the private spaces, for example, the home. So the He for She campaign has really done so much, and it has brought tremendous results. I can take an example of the Mokoni region in the Manicaland province. There has been so much change, because when UN Women started working there with implementing partners, it was not a good case. It was not good what you saw there. When you talk to the men there was so much dominance. And this is taken across all spaces in the workplace, at the governmental level, but so much change has been done. So yeah, it's just a starting point, but we are making progress as we go on.
And thank you for talking about the He for She campaign. So this allows us to talk about gender and governance. How are women represented in politics, and how are other minority groups also represented? Because when we talk about gender, most people think of women only, but there are also other groups, minority groups, disabled people, people with, let's say, there are other groups that are involved. So how is this issue addressed in your own country?
I think in my country, you know, yes, I'm from Lesotho, and the political field is open for all. I mean, there's nothing technically that we can say is barring women or other marginalized groups from participating in politics. But we know that the reality is that is not the case. That is not the case. It is a male-dominated environment, and the way also that politics are conducted are inhibiting. There are a lot of things that are inhibiting that dissuade women and other groups to want to participate in there. But when you look at, and it's not that women do not participate, right? But when we talk of participation, we're often looking at their representation at certain levels of decision making. But when you go into political parties, you will find that they are there, but they're also, the way in which they participate is questionable. You'll find that there's a women's wing, where all the women are grouped together. And when you also interrogate what it is that the women's wing does, it's almost activities that are at the periphery to the main agenda of the political party, and you don't see how it is that they're able to influence the main running and influence the agenda of the main political parties. And they also tend. So how we change that, I would say abolish women's wings altogether, and let's have a space, create accommodating, inclusive spaces where everybody can participate from the get-go. Because now when we have to grab or draw women from the wings, or draw youth from specific leagues, I mean, I don't think it creates the kind of inclusivity that we want to see in our political environments. And then, of course, you have women who will go and vote. We have youths who, huge registration drives to get youths to register. But, even with all of that, it still doesn't translate to the numbers or the picture that we want to see of representation at parliament, at the local level. And in Lesotho, a couple of years back, we tried implementing a quota system at local level.
So what do you say to those who think that quotas?
So quotas work, and they can work not only at electoral level, but they can work also within the political parties. So when we do quotas, it has to be a comprehensive package that goes from the political party and into the political system. So when we did our local government elections in 2005, we had a quota system that had 30% representation of all the local government electoral divisions were set aside for women. And the result that came from that was quite overwhelming, because we got 58% of women voted into local government, meaning that there was an extra 28% of women who were voted in outside of the set quotas that were reserved for them. So there are ways that do work to increase women's representation, and once we have that representation, we need to work now on ensuring that the agendas that we address cater to drive women's agenda, and and also build their capacities to to be able to participate fully and effectively as elected representatives.
Following from the example of Lesotho, I would say that Cape Verde has a very similar political and societal environment when it comes to the fact that women have access to political participation, so do other groups. There's relative freedom in terms of engaging with politics, but also that didn't quite reflect in having enough women then actually engaging with the system. So we are currently going through the path of actually approving a parity law. We decided not to go for the quota option, and instead, because we have a very heavily party system, where just by having lists that are zebra, as in alternating between the different genders, we already correct that deficiency of not having enough people from either genders. So we're going through a similar process. But I would say that in relation to the women wings, they were actually quite important in the Cape Verdean case, because we have them in our political parties as well as in parliament. And they have been instrumental in trying to get this consensus among the different political parties that it was time for us to accept that in Cape Verde we had to have some kind of policy, positive action to correct the deficiency of the past. So I understand that it kind of feels that they are segregated and they're just dealing with women's issues. But if they're used in an instrumental way, then they can actually be behind some very positive change. And they were also very important when it comes to legal reform. In terms of domestic violence, it was also initiated by them, and they also worked with the women's wing within the law society, the engineering society. So there's these professional societies that have women wings, and they all work together, and the result has been quite good. So sometimes they can be useful, I guess.
I want to testify to that, because Senegal, we have a gender parity law since a few years now, and it is not fully implemented because, of course, it is a party system, so women are still playing peripheral roles. But I think affirmative action works. So what is the case? So maybe now we can talk from a point of view of economic governance. What do you think right now are the impact or the implications of rising powers' interest in Africa?
I think it's very difficult to sort of dissect, and as we were talking about it this morning, we're trying to identify or actually demystify, I guess, the myths around China as a rising power coming into Africa. And as much as we would want to say that there's a sense of do good, to empower Africans, to employ Africans, I think a lot more needs to be done with regards to rising powers coming in, like China, coming into Africa and giving some sort of agency to local youth, local people at the managerial levels, the much higher executive levels. I think there needs to be more representation there, and I think that will create a sense of transparency, because right now locals are left out of the boardroom, out of the negotiating tables, but there's a lot of skills transfer and support at the bottom, but where is it at the top? And I think once rising powers start bringing more locals on the negotiating tables, I think it will be more transparent, and I think it will create a better agency for the people in the country, and I think it is more progressive.
Maybe even we can learn from your country. Namibia has been described by some as one of the next developmental states in Africa. So why do you think we'll come back to the rising power question, but why do you think Namibia is doing good in terms of economic governance?
I think accountability, and I think just going back to the question that we were talking about, governance and violence, is that there's every single sector within the Namibian government is taking ownership. Somebody is taking ownership. The justice system, for instance, is huge, and it involves so many players. But the judiciary has taken ownership of creating the Criminal Justice Task Force. I think in terms of gender issues, obviously the Ministry of Gender has taken ownership, but then there are a lot of players in it as well. I think dominus litis in the Namibian government is that we want peace and prosperity, and I think that drives the government to be accountable and to make sure that everybody's agency is represented on the table.
How about Uganda?
Well, I would like to expand it beyond Uganda, since I also stay in Cameroon I've been staying there for a while, about 5 years.
I hope you talk about
Oh, yeah, a little bit. So I've got different ideologies in relation to African realities. And as we discuss, yes, country-specific is very important, but also a general picture of what's happening across the continent is very relevant. So we get to realize that in most of the African countries, the political economy has been congested by the ideologies of the West and the Chinese. And there is a lot of blame on each of the sides. One is saying that maybe their approach is the best, other than the other. So in specific, I wanted to say that not only in particular to Uganda, there is a specific need for our government to always get experts who can be able to interpret the policies that could assist in the process of engaging the different actors that get to be coming into our economy. That is, if the Chinese wish to provide cash to construct buildings or roads or stadiums or boost any sort of production sector within the country, then there should be a better policy that can be able to enable the citizens to benefit in this process. At the same time, the taxation should be well articulated so that we can manage to limit on capital flow out of the country. So all these aspects, I believe, if they are properly engaged, we will be able to benefit from the newcomers across the continent and within the different countries. In specific to Cameroon, what I've observed, I'm not so much deeper into the politics of the country, but I've observed that the country, there are many multinational companies, and the French are really trying to disorganize the whole society. I feel it's very important to draw lines on where the international countries are supposed to interfere into the national economies of countries and allow the citizens and their countries to evolve and see the picture where they want to be and try to create that picture as the citizens within a given country across Africa. So as we talk about the political economy, we really need to look at the actors within the state, beyond the state, and the citizens themselves, being actors in this process of seeing what we wish to see across the continent.
It's very important that you mention that, because we talk about the state as if it is a monolithic actor. It is not. The state, there are diverging interests inside the state and state agencies. So what do you think about that? Zimbabwe has recently offered us a big surprise this year.
Well, it's when it comes to rising powers, I'm happy that he talked about giving agency to the local people and to the countries as a whole, especially when it comes to negotiating. And there's always been a power struggle, obviously, when it comes to a power that is more powerful and a country that is, well, not as powerful. Let's take, for example, it's a weak state. And when it comes, when we look at it from up here, we will see that the conclusion that we'll make is that, well, Zimbabwe is powerless in a situation like that. They cannot negotiate because they really need the investment. But from what we've been learning throughout the whole of this work, it kind of gives a different picture that actually we have the power, we have the agency, because it's not like we are only gaining, but it's an issue of two parties coming together to build something wholesome. Sure. So when I think of rising powers and what, for example, China and what it is doing in Africa, I always come back to the issue that it is us, the Africans, our states. What are we doing with what we are getting? What are we doing to build up our own states? Because the decision is ours at the end of the day. And the decision on how we are going to use the resources that we're getting, for example, from China, should be what we are focusing on. Of course, let's try and ensure that we have the agency when it comes to negotiating, but I'm quite certain that over the years we have grown to understand the relationship that we have with China and other big powers. But let's now try to rebuild our countries. Let's focus on our people, because a Chinese company that was working in the diamond fields in Chiazwa, the government just woke up one day and they changed the policy. They changed the policy such that the Chinese government felt very, very vulnerable. And this comes back to the issue of securing property rights in a state.
And thank you for mentioning that we have the power. Just a final word maybe to Aleida, because you were sharing about the civil society in Cape Verde. So we are the civil society. And which role for the civil society in governance?
Yes, I think definitely it would be very difficult to bring societal change or transformation without engaging the population. And I think for as long as there is a distance between policymakers, between people who are supposed to represent the population and the society, very little is going to be achieved which are in the interest of the population. So I think we in Africa have to work towards strengthening our civil society capacity, working together across different countries and regions to try and put forward the ideas that we want then to be implemented by the state, and just strengthening, this connection that we have with the state. It's important.
Thank you so much, Anita.
Thank you.
And finally, I'll just ask you to use 3 words to define the African continent right now, and we wrap up. Kabanda?
The land of great people.
3 words. I think I'll use the same. It's a powerful continent. It's a beautiful continent, and it's a happy continent.
That's quite hard, but I will say developing, growth, and sustainability. Those are the 3 words that are really, really critical at this particular point.
My 3 adjectives for Africa would be hopeful, prosperous, and inspiring.
Yeah, I think I would say it's a beautiful continent, it's a welcoming continent, and at the same time, it's a challenging place that has still a lot of work that needs to be done.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure having this conversation with you. I learned a lot, and I thank you for taking part in this 30-minute interview.
Thank you.
Bye.